Today's story is going to make you rethink everything you thought you knew about life and what happens after we die. It's about a man whose near-death experience turned his beliefs upside down and revealed something truly amazing. His journey from being an atheist to meeting Jesus during this experience is nothing short of incredible. In this video, you'll learn the surprising truth about what happens after we die and how it might change your perspective forever. If you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on more stories that could change your life. Give this video a thumbs up and share it with anyone who needs to hear this truth. Let's dive in. I want to share a really pivotal moment in my life. Before I went through my near-death experience, I was deeply involved in my work in the Everett area, particularly with local youth organizations. I was a youth program director at developing programs for at-risk teens. Honestly, I adored that job. Working with young people was my passion. I often joked that I would do that work until my last breath. Little did I know how true that would turn out to be. So on June 15th, 2011, everything changed. I ended up with a kidney stone stuck on my right side. Having dealt with kidney stones before, I instantly recognized what was happening. At first, I thought I could just wait it out, hoping the pain would ease like it had in the past. But oh boy, this time the pain just wouldn't let go. Eventually, I decided it was time to seek help. I remember walking calmly into the emergency room and nonchalantly telling them, "I've got a kidney stone. It's right here." I figured it would be the usual routine. They'd take care of me, give me some morphine, and then I'd be on my way feeling better. However, things took a turn I didn't expect. They found out I had a kidney infection too. So not only did I get antibiotics for that, but the doctors also decided I needed to stay overnight and undergo surgery the following day. The surgery itself went off without a hitch. They successfully broke up the stones as they planned. What we didn't realize was that I was one of those unfortunate individuals for whom those antibiotics didn't really work against the infection I had. When they broke up the stones, the infection essentially entered my bloodstream. My body started to fail me. I went septic, and everything began to shut down. Not just my heart and lungs, but every part of me. Let me tell you, it was a frightening experience. But what I remember most vividly is the surprising lack of fear I felt when I came to terms with the fact that I was dying. As a born-again Christian, I held on to the belief that death is merely a transition to heaven. So when I realized I was leaving this world, all that went through my mind was, I'm going home. According to the medical records, I was clinically dead for about an hour and 45 minutes. It's hard to put into words how surreal that experience was, but it changed everything for me moving forward. Let me share something extraordinary that happened to me. I had this wild experience where I felt like I completely left my body. It was as if I shot through the hospital floors, blasting up into the bright blue sky and then into outer space. Seriously, it was this insane speed that I can hardly put into words. You know that line from the Bible, "To be absent from the body is to be in the presence of the Lord"? That's exactly how it felt. I was moving faster than a blink of an eye. By the time your eyelid goes down, I was already in heaven. When I was traveling into this new realm, I had this vision that some people call a light at the end of a tunnel. For me, it looked more like a window. I can't say for sure it was a window, but that's how I would describe it best. And when I finally passed through that window, everything changed. It was like nothing in the world was wrong. It was sheer peace. There wasn't a single thing around me that could irritate or agitate my soul. What struck me most in that moment was the feeling of belonging. I never really realized how out of place I felt before until I found myself in heaven. It was crystal clear that I was genuinely welcome there. The entire atmosphere felt so inviting, like everything around me was embracing me. Now, when I say everything, I'm not just talking about God or Jesus or the Holy Spirit. I mean the trees, the flowers, everything there seemed thrilled that I had arrived. I could sense that joy enveloping me. It was truly profound. Interestingly, I never knew this until I got to heaven, but my biggest longing was to see Jesus Christ face to face. That connection was everything to me. I realized then that heaven isn't just a destination, it's about being with a person, and in this case, it's Jesus. As I wandered through this lush forest of trees, I distinctly felt that Jesus was just beyond them. It dawned on me that I needed to push through the trees to reach him. As I moved ahead, it was like the trees magically parted to clear my path. It felt incredible, almost surreal, like the entire universe was guiding me to him. As I made my way through the forest, it felt like the trees on either side were whispering, "He's off to see the king." That's the kind of energy I picked up on, a sense of anticipation filling the air. Then I emerged into this vast clearing, and there he was. Jesus stood slightly to my left, gazing out at a crowd that was nothing short of extraordinary. Angels and what I would call redeemed souls, people who had once walked the earth and were now basking in heaven. When I got closer, I didn't just walk up to him casually. No, I found myself getting down on my hands and knees, my eyes fixated on his feet. It felt so significant, like the most respectful position I could take. He was still focused on the enormous throng before him, millions, maybe even billions, while I stayed low, only catching glimpses of his legs, never quite able to see his face just yet. At that moment, a powerful thought struck me. You did this for me. It was an overwhelming realization that the only reason I found myself in heaven was because of his sacrifice. A flood of gratitude swept over me. Everything within me was just so thankful. The only thing I could manage to say was, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," repeating it like a mantra, as if that could express the depth of my appreciation. I paused, letting everything sink in. I realized that his love extended beyond everyone. It felt deeply personal. Sure, I knew he died for all humanity, but in that instant, it hit me that he had carved out a piece of heaven just for me. Perhaps it sounds selfish, but that's how it resonated within me. Starting to lift my gaze, I took in more of him. I looked from his feet to his ankles, feeling a warmth. His ankles loved me. Then his calves, his knees, every part of him radiated love. It was as if he was entirely designed to embrace me, but when I finally looked up to meet his eyes, that's when everything changed. When he turned his gaze upon me, it took my breath away. In that moment, he looked at me as if I had never sinned, like I was perfect in his eyes. The weight of that understanding was immense and stayed with me, a realization that still overwhelms me to this very day. I'll never forget that moment, the look he gave me. It struck me deeply. You know how in the Bible it talks about forgiveness? Particularly in Hebrews, it mentions that when God forgives, it's as if he forgets. That thought resonated with me. In that instant, I realized something profound. I am an eternal being, and while my body may fade, the essence of who I am will never perish. After that powerful encounter, I felt an incredible transfer of wisdom, almost like something was being uploaded into me. Then Jesus looked at me and simply said, "No, it's not your time. Go back." It was so straightforward, like he was stating a fact. Surprisingly, I was okay with going back. I didn't retrace my steps through the forest. Instead, I soared right above it, floating as if it were the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't flying as we often picture it. Imagine just thinking, I'd like to be 10 feet above the ground, and poof, you're there, weightless and without fear. It felt like those moments in the Bible when Jesus walked on water. When I neared the spot where I meant to leave, it wasn't like there was a door or a portal. I just felt it. One more step and I'd return to my previous realm. I paused there, sensing my body wasn't quite ready yet. Oddly enough, I was joyful about it. Then I turned around, filled with excitement, and gazed into the forest ahead, knowing Jesus was waiting on the other side. I felt a pull to veer off to the left instead. As I moved in that direction, it was like all of creation erupted in joy around me. What I saw left me breathless. Mountains that danced like ocean waves, undulating before my eyes. They weren't just static, they flowed and moved as if alive. The beauty was overwhelming, and I reveled in it, thinking I might actually get to stay in this magnificent place. I realized it was time to reconnect with Jesus, so I took that step back towards him. This time I found myself behind him for some reason, but then I went back to the same spot where I had knelt before. I bowed down once more, and he started speaking to me again. There was so much he wanted to share. I can't forget the incredible light radiating from him. I didn't mention it last time, but it was like this profound brightness that enveloped me. It felt warm and inviting, wrapping around me like a comforting blanket. After that second encounter, he looked down at me with such love in his eyes. He gently told me, "No, it's not your time. You need to go back." In response, I felt a rush of emotions. I floated over the treetops again, reaching the edge of that place I had come through. Just as I thought I was about to leave entirely, I suddenly sensed that my body wasn't ready. A surge of determination hit me, and I thought, no way, I'm staying. So, I had another chance to explore. This time, instead of veering to the left, I decided to head to the right side of that magnificent forest. What I found was astonishing. There were these beautiful bodies of water, rivers, and seas. It seemed like that side was all about liquid. I couldn't quite grasp why, but it was mesmerizing. The shades of blue were unlike anything I had seen before. It was as if the colors in that place had a vibrancy beyond imagination. As I wandered through, I encountered saints, and it was quite an experience. I also came across so many different animals. Heaven truly is filled with life. Eventually, I found my way back to Jesus, and there was a sense of familiarity I hadn't recognized before. I positioned myself just like I had before, gazing at his feet. But then my eyes traveled up, and on the other side of him, I spotted my family. It was a heartwarming sight. My grandmother Mary stood out in front, surrounded by other relatives. They seemed to radiate joy, and I felt an overwhelming connection to them. As I found myself in heaven, an overwhelming presence of family surrounded me. It was incredible. Generations of my relatives, all connected to Jesus Christ and the Father, lined up to welcome me. The sheer emotional weight of that moment was beyond description. Previously, during my earlier visits with Jesus, I was far too focused on him to even notice these loved ones. But this time was different. I felt drawn to shift my focus from Jesus to my family, which was really profound. Trying to explain what they looked like is tricky because time doesn't exist there like it does here. But I do remember them being radiant, filled with light and joy, beaming smiles that radiated pure happiness. I couldn't help but marvel at the thought that I was witnessing my whole family together in heaven, sharing joy in a way I'd never seen on earth. Reflecting on that, I realized my understanding of family in heaven had fundamentally changed. I had always thought of family as just the broader family of God, envisioning us all encountering each other in some structured way. What I learned was far more intimate. Family genuinely matters to God, and that really hit home for me. There were definitely surprises about who was there with me. Some folks I encountered didn't fit the criteria I had in mind for who would make it to heaven. I had a very narrow view, thinking they wouldn't qualify, but clearly they met God's criteria, which is simply accepting Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior. After this overwhelming reunion, as I savored the beauty and joy of heaven, a shift occurred. Jesus spoke to me with a firm command, saying, "No, it is not your time. Go back." His words felt monumental. They resonated throughout the whole atmosphere, almost like everything else stepped aside. I imagined that creation itself was saying, "He's not addressing us. This is about you." In that moment, I felt like a soldier receiving orders. My military background kicked in, and I instinctively replied, "Yes, sir." Then I prepared myself to return. There was a moment when I felt this overwhelming message, almost like I was being told, "I need you there more than I need you here." It wasn't something spoken out loud, but it resonated deeply within me. At that moment, my grandmother Mary appeared. She looked directly at me while all this was happening and said, "Bring as many of us back with you as you can," referring to my entire family still living on earth. That hit me hard. After that profound moment, I found myself bowing before Jesus. I remember moving past these beautiful trees and reaching what I can only describe as the edge of heaven. When I took that step back, I knew I was returning to this world. Honestly, the emotion of going back was overwhelming. I felt like a baby wailing, completely inconsolable. When I floated over to my hospital room, I saw my own body lying there. The medical team had stopped their efforts. It was chilling to think they were getting ready to give up on me. The doctor was even filling out my death certificate. In that surreal experience, I truly sensed how the dynamics of relationships change in heaven. When I encountered my family members, I recognized them immediately and felt a profound bond. But it wasn't like our relationships down here. There was a simplicity and flawlessness in our love, devoid of any past conflicts or misunderstandings. It felt as if our connections were anchored in our relationship with God. Initially, I didn't want to return to earth. I wanted to stay. But with each time Jesus communicated that it wasn't my time yet, I began to feel this sense of purpose emerge within me. My grandmother's message about gathering as many souls as possible struck me. Suddenly, I was aware that I had a mission ahead. In an instant, I felt that familiar, breathtaking speed as I started to leave heaven. Once I arrived back in the hospital room, the scene was surreal. There I was, hovering above my physical self. The medical staff was packing up, having just stopped their attempts to revive me. I hesitated briefly, taking in the weight of the moment before I turned and re-entered my body. As soon as I did, something miraculous happened. The heart monitor, which had been silent, started beeping again. The medical team was shocked and hurried back to me, quickly taking action to intubate and restore my breathing. After my experience in heaven, I felt a powerful sense of peace and joy that was truly remarkable. However, coming back to life was quite a different situation for me. Physically, I was extremely weak. I had been clinically dead for nearly an hour and 45 minutes, which really took a toll on my body. Recovery was not an overnight matter, but spiritually and emotionally, that's where things shifted dramatically. I felt completely renewed, with a deep sense of purpose filling me up. This experience altered my life in ways I never thought possible. Now, I view everything, life, death, eternity, through a new lens. There's this profound understanding that our time here on earth is merely a blip compared to the vastness of eternity. Every single moment counts. I find myself pouring more love into others and passionately sharing God's message with whoever will listen. Death no longer frightens me. Instead, I have gained an appreciation for life and the unique purpose God has laid out for me. One of the most significant shifts has been the increased sense of responsibility I feel. While in heaven, my grandmother encouraged me to bring as many of us back with you as you can. That really struck a chord with me. Now, I feel compelled to share my story, helping others grasp the reality of heaven and the depth of God's love. I think about how our actions here carry lasting consequences that extend into eternity. And speaking of people, my relationships with others have transformed tremendously. I see each person I encounter as someone who is dearly loved by God, just as I had that beautiful experience of His love for me. It's made me more patient and compassionate. I find myself eager to share the feelings of love and joy that I encountered in heaven. My family relationships now hold a deeper significance for me. I cherish them even more, understanding their importance not just in this life, but beyond it. Interestingly, heaven was also filled with animals, which caught me off guard. They were everywhere. It was such a beautiful sight. Alongside familiar creatures we have on earth, I saw animals I had never encountered before. They all coexisted in perfect harmony, which was a profound reminder to me that God cares deeply for all of His creation, not just humankind. Although I didn't directly interact with these animals because I was so focused on Jesus and my family, I could still feel their joy and peace. Just like everything else in heaven, it resonated with a sense of tranquility that enveloped me. It was an incredible experience overall, one that constantly reminds me of the beauty and purpose of life. You know, I've had some incredible experiences that really changed my perception of life, love, and death. When I think about heaven, it's hard to put it into words that do it justice. The beauty there is unlike anything imaginable. Colors were alive in a way that I've never seen on Earth. The light bathed everything warmly, creating an inviting atmosphere, not like the glaring brightness we sometimes have here. Everything was just bursting with life, even things that seem inanimate. It felt as if everything coexisted in perfect harmony, free from decay or flaws. It was a beauty that really took my breath away. I remember when I had this profound experience with Jesus. It was like He just transferred knowledge into my mind. It wasn't in the way we normally communicate. Instead, it felt like He was sharing deep understanding directly with me. There were truths about God, heaven, and existence that suddenly clicked in my mind. I can't explain it fully, but when I came back, I held on to some of that wisdom, even if some faded away. One of the biggest revelations was about God's love. Before, I thought I understood it fully, but what I felt was so deeply profound. I also learned a lot about eternity and how our choices here matter more than we realize. Even the concept of spiritual warfare became clearer to me. I started recognizing that there are spiritual forces, both good and evil, that influence our lives in ways we often overlook. This awareness pushed me to be more intentional with my prayers and to adopt what the Bible refers to as the full armor of God. And let's talk about death. It used to frighten me, but that's changed dramatically. I now see it as a transition rather than an end. It's like a beautiful opening into something far greater than I ever imagined. I'm not rushing toward that, though. I genuinely believe I still have a purpose here on Earth, and I want to make the most of it. However, I can honestly say that when my time comes, I look forward to going back to that glorious place. My sense of time has shifted too. It's quite fascinating how much one experience can change everything, isn't it? I had an experience that completely reshaped my understanding of time and existence. In heaven, time as we know it doesn't really matter. Instead of days and minutes, it's like living in a constant present. This perspective really opened my eyes to how fleeting our struggles and hardships are here on Earth. It's humbling, honestly. Knowing that every moment we have is valuable and holds a deeper importance encourages me to be more intentional with my time. When I think back to my experiences there, I remember encountering people I never thought I'd see. It shifted how I view salvation in such a profound way. I've become less quick to judge others. I realize that the grace and mercy of God are so much more expansive than I had ever imagined. It isn't about adhering to a strict set of rules or being flawless. It's rooted in accepting Jesus and what his sacrifice means for us. Now, I tread carefully when it comes to assuming someone's spiritual journey. At the end of the day, only God knows what truly lies in someone's heart. Since coming back, I've felt this powerful sense of purpose. After experiencing heaven, my grandmother gave me a heartfelt message: bring as many of us back with you as you can. That moment ignited a deep responsibility within me to share my story and spread the understanding of God's love and the reality of heaven. My days are now filled with the awareness of how our actions have everlasting effects. The impact of this experience has truly changed how I relate to others. I see every person as someone deeply loved by God, just like I felt his love enveloping me. It's made me more compassionate, more patient, and so eager to reflect that love to everyone around me. Plus, my appreciation for family has skyrocketed. I'm reminded every day of how crucial our relationships are, not only in this life, but also in the one to come. Oh, and the animals. You wouldn't believe the number of creatures I saw in heaven. They were everywhere, and it amazed me how they all fit into this beautiful harmony. There were familiar faces from Earth, but also some entirely new beings I had never encountered before. It made it clear to me that God's love extends beyond humanity. He cares for all of creation. While I didn't interact with the animals much, I was mainly focused on Jesus and my family. Their presence was still striking. Seeing them there reinforced this incredible insight, that heaven holds a much larger tapestry of existence than we often acknowledge. There was a moment when I felt an overwhelming sense of joy and peace, like everything around me was filled with divine praise. It really made me appreciate the beauty of heaven, although it's tricky to describe. The colors were unlike anything on Earth, brighter and more vibrant. The light, it enveloped everything in a warm, inviting glow, never harsh or blinding. Everything had this remarkable vitality. Even the trees and flowers seemed animated, almost as if everything was spirited. There was a sense of complete harmony, no signs of decay or flaws anywhere. The beauty I experienced was beyond my wildest imagination. Then, something incredible happened. In that moment, I felt Jesus imparting knowledge directly into my being. It wasn't like he spoke to me with words. It was more like an instant understanding flooded my mind and spirit. I came to grasp concepts about God, heaven, and life that had eluded me before. Some of that wisdom slipped away when I returned to my physical self, but a part of it remained with me. One of the biggest revelations was about God's love. I always thought I had a good grasp on it, but what I experienced was so much deeper. It gave me insights into eternity, the weight of our choices here on Earth, and the reality of spiritual warfare. Some truths are so profound they defy words. Accepting them is a challenge for our human minds. Speaking of spiritual warfare, I gained a clearer view of the forces at play around us, both good and evil. I started to see our life challenges through this lens, realizing how many of our struggles have a spiritual dimension that we often miss. This awareness has encouraged me to be more intentional about prayer and to arm myself with what the Bible calls the full armor of God. My experience has completely reshaped my thoughts on death. I no longer fear it. Instead, I see it as a beautiful transition rather than an end. Don't get me wrong, I'm not rushing toward it. I believe I still have a purpose here on earth, and I want to fulfill that. However, when my time comes, I will look forward to returning to that magnificent place I experienced. You know, my view of time has definitely shifted. I used to think of it in strict, ticking hours and busy schedules, but after my experience in heaven, I've come to understand that time there is completely different. It exists as this eternal present where everything just is. This realization has highlighted how fleeting our challenges and struggles are here on earth. They may feel overwhelming at times, but in the grand scheme, they're just a blip. Now I'm so much more conscious of how I spend my time, cherishing each moment because they carry an everlasting significance. And oh, the people I saw in heaven. There were faces I truly didn't expect. That opened my eyes in a big way. It taught me to be less judgmental, you know? I've come to understand that God's grace and mercy are far more expansive than we often recognize. It's really not about checking off a list of rules or striving for perfection. What truly matters is embracing Jesus and his sacrifice for us. Now, I'm definitely more cautious about assuming I know where someone stands spiritually. Only God can truly see the heart of a person. My prayer life, it's transformed completely. Having felt God's presence so intimately in heaven, my approach to prayer has deepened. It's become a genuine dialogue with a loving Father. I find myself being more open, honest, and expectant when I pray. Every word feels more meaningful now. Then there's the incredible sense of belonging I felt in heaven. I can't put into words how profound it was. Here it's all too common to feel out of place or not quite enough, but in heaven, that just didn't exist. Everything around me, from the soft grass beneath my feet to the very air, seemed to be saying, "You belong here. We're so happy you've arrived." It was an overwhelming wave of acceptance and love. My perspective on my physical body has also changed. I've come to recognize that while our bodies are important, they're merely temporary vessels for our eternal spirits. In heaven, I felt more like my true self than I ever did in my physical form. It shifted my focus away from worrying about how I look and instead directed my energy towards nurturing my spirit. And don't even get me started on the colors. They were something else entirely. It's hard to describe because I can't find words for the hues I witnessed. When you think of the brightest blue you've ever seen, well, those colors in heaven made that look washed out. There were shades I had never seen before, colors that don't even exist in our world. Everything seemed to radiate from within, glowing with these astonishing, vibrant colors. It was magical, really. Heaven, for me, felt like a blend of intimacy and boundless expansiveness. When I was surrounded by Jesus or my family, everything felt incredibly personal, yet at the same time, I could sense an endless beauty stretching out forever. It was as if heaven expanded just enough to fit everyone and everything perfectly, living in harmony. Nature, too, was different there. I noticed how the trees seemed to part for me, and everything felt so alive and responsive. The mountains moved like gentle waves, and the light had a personality of its own, enveloping me softly. Even objects that we typically think of as lifeless seemed aware. Everything was tuned in to honoring God. Although I was deeply immersed in my own experience, there was this overwhelming feeling that everyone else around me shared in the same joy, peace, and love. It was like each person had their own tailor-made experience, yet we were all united in our admiration and worship of God. Returning to Earth was tough. Honestly, how could I want to leave such a beautiful place? But I sensed that God had a purpose for my return, and that understanding brought me some comfort. Now I view my life here as a mission, a way to share what I experienced in heaven and help others get ready for eternity. And let me tell you, worship has transformed for me. It's not just an act anymore. It became a continuous state of being there. Everyone and everything was always praising God, driven by genuine joy and love. not out of obligation. That's changed how I approach worship on earth. Now it feels fresher and deeper. While I was in heaven, I completely lost track of what was happening back on earth. I was so immersed in the experience that my body and earthly events felt irrelevant. It was only when Jesus informed me that it wasn't my time yet that I had to face the idea of coming back. My work and daily activities have taken on a new significance too. I see every task as a chance to bring a piece of heaven into this world. I always strive to approach everything in life, whether it's my job, my relationships, or even simple daily tasks, with the love and joy I felt while in heaven. That experience has reshaped how I see my time and resources. Now, I'm much more intentional about using them in ways that matter for eternity. When I was in heaven, I sensed that there was a continuous flow of communication between our world and the divine. While I didn't see specific prayers being received, I felt deeply that God is intimately aware of everything happening to us down here. Prayer, I discovered, is a profound connection linking us to heaven. I also encountered angels during my time there. They were always engaged, worshiping and performing God's will. It became clear to me that their role in our lives is more significant than we often realize, always operating under God's authority. Since returning, my relationships with those who don't share my faith have transformed. I've developed a greater urgency to share my beliefs, along with a newfound patience and love for those who may not believe yet. Understanding that every person's journey is unique has been key for me. God's love truly encompasses everyone, no matter where they stand on their spiritual path. I aim to share my experiences in a way that invites curiosity rather than pushing, always respecting each person's free will. Diving into deeper realizations brought me insights about free will and God's sovereignty. It's a complex topic, but I sense that both operate together in a way that's challenging for us to fully grasp from our perspective. God's love is so profound that He grants us the freedom to make genuine choices, even when those choices lead to pain, whether for ourselves or others. Despite this, He continuously works to bring good out of every situation. As for the nature of evil and why suffering exists, I didn't encounter any wrongdoing in heaven, but the goodness and love I experienced gave me a unique contrast to understand it better. I came to see evil as essentially the absence of God's goodness, a twist on His perfect creation. This realization reinforced for me the necessity of spreading God's light into the darkness we face in this world. You know, my near-death experience was a turning point for me. I used to dread the idea of dying, but now, not at all. It's like this veil has been lifted, and I see death as a beautiful transition rather than an endpoint. I'm not rushing to leave this world, though. I genuinely believe that God has a purpose for my life, and I want to see that through. But when my time does come, I'll embrace it wholeheartedly, filled with joy about what lies ahead. One of the key messages I hope to share from my experience is just how immense God's love is for each of us, much greater than we can ever truly grasp. Heaven isn't just a concept, it's real, and it's more magnificent than we can even begin to understand. Every choice we make has an eternal impact. And here's the thing that's super important to me. A relationship with Jesus is what truly prepares us for eternity. It's not about living a flawless life or adhering to strict rules. It's about embracing His love and forgiveness, which is freely given. While my journey was astonishing and transformative, I want to stress that it's not just about my experience. It's really about God's overarching story of love for humanity. My hope is that by sharing what I went through, it encourages others to seek their own connection with God and to look at life through an eternal lens. I appreciate the chance to share my experience. Thank you for listening. It's a lot to ponder when it comes to life, death, and everything that comes after.